A mighty oak tree once stood tall and proud over a wide and winding stream. One day the oak looked down upon the reed that grew beside him and proclaimed, "Why, little one, even the weight of a robin is a load too great for you. You should plant your roots deep and grow tall and strong like me." The reed replied, "I may not be grand, but I am content. I feel safer to stay as I am." "Safe?" the oak scoffed. "You get twisted and bent by the smallest winds, while I stand firm and do not relent." As the great oak spoke these words, a large storm began to brew, and a strong gale blew across the land. The force of the gale was such that the mighty oak tree was uprooted and fell across the stream. "How have you, so small and frail, survived when I, so strong, have been felled?" asked the tree in disbelief.
"You were stubborn and wouldn't bend," replied the reed, "whereas we yield and allow the gale to pass harmlessly by."
Moral of the story: critical thinking is a framework that shows us the need to be flexible in our approach and thinking. Otherwise, one day we may become uprooted.
Welcome back. In this episode, we will be looking at a number of reasoning flaws that we commonly find in everyday situations. The first one is the inconsistency flaw. Let's look at this scenario. It's a magazine article that says we have to be very careful when approving prescription drugs. Patient safety and well-being are most important. Therefore, the effectiveness and side effects of these drugs must be tested carefully. This is a legal person making this comment in a newspaper article. Perfectly reasonable, absolutely nothing wrong with it. Now, picture the same legal person making the following remark: "We should not be so stringent with herbal medication. Patients should have the choice of trying out herbal alternatives to prescription medicine." Same person, two different opinions, two different views. Very stringent view for prescription drugs, not so stringent view for herbal treatment. When you see an argument of this nature, you have to ask yourself, why the double standards? Why shouldn't herbal medication be carefully tested too? Is there any reason why patient safety and well-being is not as important in this case? Is there any reason why side effects or effectiveness of the herbal medication should not come into play? These factors, these questions have been conveniently ignored in the second argument for the herbal treatment, but stringently applied to prescription drugs. What you see here is an inconsistency flaw. One set of rules applied to one set of beliefs, completely different set of rules applied to another situation. Both are inconsistent. This is a reasoning flaw. Let's move on to another example. We have a senior politician who says, "Teachers are important to the growth of the nation. Teachers shape young minds and prepare them for the growing or changing requirements of the modern world. Only individuals who are qualified and have a passion for teaching and are willing to go the extra mile should be employed as teachers. Perfectly sound advice. Very reasonable statement. Now, when we have the same person making this statement, the following statement, we see an inconsistency. The statement now is, the school should employ Mark as a teacher. He's a fine young man. Although he doesn't have the qualifications and doesn't have any teaching experience, I am sure he will do just fine. His brother, Jason, is a close friend of mine. What do we see in both these scenarios? We see that there is a certain set of criteria which have been put forward as those required for a teacher, but yet those same criteria are not being applied to the person we are talking about here, Mark. Does Mark have the qualifications? No. Does he have a passion for teaching? We don't know. Does he go the extra mile? Will he go the extra mile? We don't know. What we do know is that the set of criteria applied to teachers in general and the ones applied to Mark, very different. This is an inconsistency flaw.
A great mind becomes a great fortune.
Let's examine the next reasoning flaw, the does not follow flaw. Have a look at this newspaper article. It says that thousands of people have seen lights in the night sky that they have not been able to identify. It goes on to say that the existence of life in other planets is fast becoming a reality. Examine this argument. Thousands of people have seen lights. We don't know what those lights are. Because of that observance, life in other planets is fast becoming a reality. There is no logical link between the premise and the conclusion. The conclusion does not follow from the premise, but is presented as if it does. The premise is that since thousands of people have seen lights in the night sky, those lights must inevitably come from life from other planets. But there is absolutely no evidence or link to conclude this. So we have a situation where the premise and the conclusion are disjointed, they are not connected to each other, but are presented as if they are. This is a does not follow reasoning flaw. The next reasoning flaw is the horse laugh flaw. It's got a funny name, and there's a reason for that. Let's look at this scenario to understand the horse laugh reasoning flaw. Harun says to Aznil, "Do you believe in UFOs?" And Aznil says, "No, I don't." Harun then asks, "Do you believe that the Great Wall of China exists?" Aznil responds by saying, "Of course." Harun says, "Well, you shouldn't. Since you're skeptical about UFOs, you should also be skeptical about the Great Wall of China. You haven't seen the Great Wall personally, just like you haven't seen UFOs. So because you haven't seen the Great Wall of China, you should be skeptical about its existence. Sounds like a silly argument. Like the next one that we're going to look at. We have a scientist here who says, if Einstein's theory of relativity is correct, my car should get heavier and shorter the faster I drive. That doesn't happen. So clearly Einstein is wrong. The whole theory is just crazy. Both the examples demonstrate the horse laugh flaw. Let's see how. The objective is to present the argument in such a way that it sounds ridiculous. That's the whole purpose of this flaw, to mock the opponent's argument, attempting to inspire an emotional reaction. It goes after emotions, not logic. The objective is to make the argument appear foolish and go against common sense. So if you go back to our first example of the Great Wall of China, it appears foolish to suggest that the wall doesn't exist when all the evidence shows that it does. The ridiculous nature of this flaw is done on purpose. It's to show that this whole argument doesn't make sense. Hence the term horse laugh. It's like a horse laughing at the argument because the argument is ridiculous. So it's a mocking way of fighting the argument and oversimplifying it. Coming back to the Einstein example, by the way, actually a car does get heavier and shorter when you drive fast, but the effect is so minuscule that it cannot be felt or seen. The theory is correct. The next reasoning flaw is called the ad hoc flow. This is how it works. Let's imagine a scenario where there are two people having a conversation. The first man is a scientist and he says to the other man, "You claim you have ESP. I'm going to do a number of experiments to confirm this. So please cooperate with me." And the man responds to the scientist by saying, "Well, my ESP powers do not work in the presence of a non-believer like yourself." Let's look at a second example. We have two individuals having a conversation about a house. We have an owner of the house who wants to sell the house, and we have a potential buyer who's interested to buy the house. Now the buyer says, "I want to buy your house at the discount of 10% as advertised." The seller then turns around to the buyer and says, "I'm sorry, but the discount does not apply to wealthy people like yourself." What's happened here in both cases? Well, in both cases, we see that new conditions or new elements have been brought into the argument. The elements were not there previously. They have been brought into the argument to fix the holes of the argument so that it appears valid. In other words, the person who is arguing is trying to create an exception to the rule and trying to give a justification as to why the rule cannot, should not, and must not be applied to the situation being discussed. Let's go back and have a look. The person who has extrasensory perception, or ESP, tells the scientist that "I have ESP, but my ESP powers will not work in front of you because you do not believe in my powers." Now this is an introduction of an element which only aims to fix the holes in the argument, to make the argument appear right. When the man says this, it's very difficult for the scientist to come up with a counter argument. It's exactly the same situation in the second case, where the seller tells the buyer, my discount does not apply to wealthy people, and apparently you are a wealthy person, so my discount does not apply to you. The introduction of extra elements into an argument to make the argument valid. This is called ad hoc reasoning. Let's move on to another example. A wealthy man is talking to a friend and says, I know you feel that I should help poor people, but you have never been rich before. There are many things about wealth that you just won't understand. Now, the same flaw has been used in this argument by saying that there are many things about wealth that you just won't understand, eliminates the possibility of further arguing it through. This is ad hoc reasoning, and it has been put in place to fix the holes of the original argument. The next reasoning flaw is called the unexplained versus unexplainable reasoning flaw. Let's see how it works. We have a scenario here of a news article which says it is impossible to find a cure for cancer as the mechanics of cancer cells are not well understood. So the argument is that we don't understand how cancer cells work, so it will be impossible for us to find a cure. Let's look at the second example. Another news article. It says, even with all our sophisticated technology, we are not able to predict when and where earthquakes will occur. This is one mystery that man will never solve. The conclusion presented is that man will never solve the mysteries of earthquakes, and hence will never be able to predict when and where they will happen. Now, in both the examples, we see the unexplained versus unexplainable reasoning flaw. Just because we do not have an adequate explanation for a phenomena at this point in time, today, it doesn't mean that that phenomena will remain unexplainable forever. It's very likely that advancements in our knowledge may allow us to explain issues that today appear unexplainable. Cast your mind back into history. There have been numerous phenomena that were unexplainable at that particular point in time, but much later became completely explainable and understandable. Things like germs, for example, remain unexplained for a long time, but eventually, through our persistence and efforts of discovery, became explainable. So too with orbits of planets. The actual orbits of the planets that we observed, compared to the mathematical equivalent of the orbits, did not reconcile. There was something wrong. There was something missing. The whole phenomena was unexplained, but became explainable later as we grew in our knowledge of science and technology. The existence of black holes remained unexplained for a long time before the theories to show their existence became reality. So too with something as fundamental as gravity. Gravity remained unexplained until our knowledge grew to an extent where we understood the fundamentals of the physics of the Earth. Let's look at a last example for this reasoning flaw. The argument put forward is that time, as we know it, does not exist. The reasoning for this is you cannot describe time without using time as a reference. You cannot see time, you cannot taste time, you cannot smell time. So does it exist? If you look at a clock, What does a clock measure? Does it measure time, or does it measure the movements of its own hands? So does time really exist? If it does exist, when was it created? Has it always existed? Now this is an argument put forward to claim that time is a figment of our imagination because today we cannot fully explain the phenomena of time. But as we have discussed, what we cannot explain today fully may be completely comprehensible tomorrow. So this is a flaw in reasoning.
Minds are like parachutes. They only function when open.
The next reasoning flaw is called the teleological reasoning flaw. This is how it works. This is a news article which says, why do human teeth develop with such regularity into a structure that's well formed for biting and chewing? Clearly, the final cause of teeth is the act of biting and chewing. The argument goes on. Teeth develop with regularity because of the act of biting and chewing. The conclusion is that the latter has caused the former. This reasoning flaw says that the future causes the present, not the other way around. Logically speaking, events in the present lead up to the future. In this flaw, however, it is the future that has caused the present events. Clearly, this is a flaw in reasoning. It is based on a reversal of cause and effect. This is an effect causing a cause rather than a cause resulting in an effect. This argument is also known as argument from final consequences. You see the same reasoning being put forward in this argument, which says that global warming exists today as a phenomena so that humans can figure out how to solve this complex problem. This is a complete reversal of cause and effect. The end result is global warming. Various things have led to the creation of global warming. These factors are all ignored in this reasoning flaw, and the flaw starts from the exact opposite end by using the conclusion as the starting point. Global warming. Global warming has been created or exists as a phenomena so that we can solve the problem. Future leading to the present. This is a reasoning flaw.